Hey, how's it going? It's Dan from modular.dev. I'm here today to go over some new updates that have been published as with .NET 5 Release Candidate 1, specifically about Blazor and some of the new functionality you have there. I've linked the document in the description, but I'll bring it up here so you can take a look. So with Release Candidate 1, there was a good number of things added, including WebAssembly performance improvement, component virtualization, WebAssembly pre-rendering, and so on and so forth. To me, I think the performance improvements are great, and I think that they're well needed. But I think I want to go over the virtualization, the JavaScript isolation, and if we have time, maybe the file input support. That's probably all we'll get through today, and definitely take a look through this document if you're interested in some of the other things that got released with Release Candidate 1. So let's go ahead and create a new project, and we'll go over the virtualization first because that's the easiest one to do, and then we'll go over the other ones. Alright, so I'm just going to create a new Blazor app, and it's going to be called RC1 items, I guess, I don't know. And we'll put that in this folder here. Alright, so I'm going to make it ASP.NET Core hosted. We don't need progressive web application for this one. Alright, let's go ahead and create. Okay, so the first thing I do want to point out is on the client project, things have changed a little bit. In the last video I did when it was release candidate, or when it was preview 8, the project definition and some of the property groups were a little bit different, but they have simplified it. So all you should really need now is hide some of these things so it's not so in your face. Okay. So this project, we have Blazor.Web Assembly, or Microsoft.net.sdk.Blazor Web Assembly. So that's what the SDK is now. It was something else before, but this is going to be what you use for WebAssembly going forward. And the target framework we have as Net 5.0. Everything else that was there, we likely don't need anymore. If you did have a service worker, you will still need that. But everything else you don't really need there. And then all of your packages should reference the release candidate 1. So if you're using Visual Studio Preview, that's how you're going to be able to do these things. I don't think they're out in the regular Visual Studio Community 2019 yet, but probably soon. And again, if you're not familiar with the Blazor release timeline, this whole thing will release as a stable package in November as .NET 5. And then I think they're going to have a release every year in November, .NET 6, 7, etc. So we're getting close to that timeline, and they're just kind of finishing up things now with Release Candidate 1. So as I said, let's go ahead and go over virtualization first. If you have created a project, or if you've ever created a Blazor project, you're probably familiar with the fetch data screen. So let me just run it here so you can see what it looks like. Oh, I need to run it with the server project as the default project, or the startup project. Okay. So you've probably seen this before if you've been using Blazor, and you're going to see the home, the counter, the fetch data. So under fetch data, we have this grid here, and right now what we're doing is in the code, you'll see that we're going out. I'm going to close some of these so they're not taking up so much space. We're going out, getting http.get from JSON async, weather forecast, and we're grabbing the weather forecast data. So where does that actually come from? On our server-side project, we have a weather forecast controller where we're just populating, looks like maybe 5 random weather items. So let's go ahead and up that a bit to maybe 500, and we'll see what happens. So now we should have 500 weather items coming up. All right, and here it is. And if you'll notice that it's it pulled up relatively quickly, but this is fairly simple. We're not doing a whole lot in there. Let's try maybe upping this to 50,000. Okay, and now it is taking a while. And my computer is starting to freak out a bit, if you can hear the fans going. So I'm going to stop this so that it stops fetching that. And so what's actually going on is we're grabbing a lot of items and we're putting it back onto the screen. I'm going to put that down to 500 again. But if you have that type of problem where you have a lot of complex data, I mean, this is a pretty simple table, but if you have a lot of complex items and it's creating a lot of elements in your document model, things can start performing slowly. So that's why they created the virtualization. So basically, how it works. Let me pull up the. I think it was. No, that is not the right link. Okay. Dotnet. No, that is not it either. I have it on my. I have the link on the description of the video, but here I found it now. So basically, for virtualization, we're going to do virtualize. That's the name of it. I couldn't remember what it was. So virtualize, and this is a new component. And it looks like IntelliSense is having a little bit of trouble here with this. Maybe let's close it down and bring it back up and see if it fixes itself. It doesn't seem to be, but let's just go ahead and see if it works. So we're going to do items, and we're going to set a context. So in this case, items is going to be our forecasts, and our context is going to be our forecast, just as if we were doing a for each loop. Now we can go ahead and stick that in there and get rid of our for each loop. We have a bunch of errors here, but I don't really know if they're actually errors. Let's go ahead and try running this. Yeah, that worked. That worked fine. So I'm not sure why IntelliSense was having some problems with that. But you'll notice now that, well, the scrolling is a little bit odd. I hit the scroll bar one time and it's scrolling all of these. So that's a little bit concerning. I'm not sure if that's a bug or what that is. But basically what happens with the virtualization, you can read about that here, but it improves performance because it's not actually rendering all these items to the document object model. It does it kind of in real time. So probably if I had something underneath my grid, maybe the scroll bar wouldn't be acting so strangely. But by having it up here, I should be able to scroll through these, and really, man, that is not good. Hopefully they get that fixed. If I look at this in Chrome, there's definitely not 500 rows here. Which means the other ones are getting hidden. They're not even on the screen. It's not like they're on there, but they're hidden. I mean hidden with CSS. they're actually not even on there. So that's what this virtualize does, which can be really good if you're having some slowdown on your website due to too many items on your screen. So definitely take advantage of virtualize if you can, and hopefully they get this IntelliSense thing worked out. It's claiming we're having an error, but we're really not. So okay, that's virtualization. I want to get into how you can add JavaScript. It's JavaScript. What did they call it? JavaScript isolation. So what that refers to is let's say that you're creating a class library for some Blazor component sets you have. So let's go ahead and do that. We can add a new project, and I'm going to call it, well, I got to choose a Razor class library here, and I'm going to call it Razor class library is fine. So we'll go ahead and hit create and create again, and now we have a class library. We have a component. So let's go ahead and just try to reference this class library in our client project. So let's go ahead and right-click dependencies and add a project reference. And we're going to reference this project. Now, if we were on, maybe we had this as a NuGet package, we would, instead of right-clicking and saying add project reference, we would say add or manage NuGet packages. And then we would pull in somebody's NuGet package. So if you're creating components and that you want them to be received as a NuGet package, that's definitely something we can do here. So now that I have a reference to that, I can call component 1 from, let's do the index page. So component 1. And that is going to be in the Razor class library. Okay, so now if I hit run here, component 1 should show up underneath the survey prompt. And there it is. This Blazor component is defined in the Razor class library package, which is what was shown in this component. So let's go a little bit deeper now. Let's go ahead and add some JavaScript to this component. So I'm going to add a code block, and I'm going to do protected override async task on initialized async. So this is going to get run when this component is initialized. So now if we go back to the docs that I was talking about earlier, we can see that, let's see if we could find it. We can add JavaScript to the component by using something like this. var module equals await JS runtime, blah, blah, blah. So let's go ahead and grab that, and we'll make some changes to it. So obviously we need to inject the JavaScript runtime, so JS runtime, IJS runtime. Okay, I'm missing a assembly reference. Let's see, what is that? Let's go ahead and see if we can figure out what had it on a app that I was working on just a minute ago, so let's see if I can pull it up and figure out what that was called. For some reason, IntelliSense isn't working the greatest right now, which does happen sometimes when you're working in Blazor, unfortunately. Okay, Microsoft.interrupt. Okay, so that is what we needed. Let's go ahead and inject IJS runtime. All right, and you know what? I think I'm just going to restart this project. I'm not sure why everything is failing. couple little glitches that they need to get figured out before the release, but I'm sure they will. So let's see if now we can inject IJS runtime. There it is, JS runtime. Okay, now we can do JS runtime dot invoke async, and we can pull in a JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and create that JavaScript file. They have one for us already called example.js interop, but we can kind of get rid of this. So if you go back to the example, they have this export function show prompt. And so if you're not familiar with JavaScript modules, this is an example of JavaScript module exporting this function called show prompt. So we're going to export that, and then in the component, we're going to, well, first of all, we have to rename my components to the library name. So in this case, Razor class library. And obviously you would change this depending on whatever your project is called. And this is kind of the default folder that it's going to go to. So even though it's in the www root for you, when somebody uses your NuGet package or uses your project, it's going to go in that folder when they compile. So that's good to know. So let's go ahead and now I'm just going to get rid of this too. Let's go ahead and create a button and say click me. And when that is clicked, we want to show the prompt from this JavaScript file. So, all right, I'm going to close down these other ones so I'm not getting them mixed up. Okay, on click, show prompt. Let's create a function over here called async task show prompt. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to keep a reference to this module. We don't want it to be local because then we're not going to be able to reference it here. So we're going to create a JS object reference, and we'll call it, I don't know, JS object reference is fine. And we'll just set that equal to the result of this. Okay, so now JS object reference, and here we're going to do invoke async. And again, this is from the this kind of documentation. I guess put in string there, and there it is. We got to put a message in here showing a prompt. Okay, and we'll await that. So if everything worked okay, we should now be able to run this. All right, so we were able to click that button and it popped open a prompt. So basically what happened was, again, let's just recap this. We created a JavaScript file, which was basically a JavaScript module that exported a function called show prompt. Then we imported that module here and called show prompt from here, keeping a reference to it. So that's cool because now if somebody like takes your project or your NuGet package, they don't have to worry about importing all those JavaScript files. If you noticed, when in our client project, we didn't have to say anything about what this JavaScript file was called. All of that happened in the class library itself. So it makes it really easy for somebody that wants to take your project and just run with it, which is great. Now, I do want to talk about just real briefly about JavaScript files in general and whether or not you need to be disposing of your objects. So whenever you whenever you invoke something in JavaScript, if we have, let's say we have something like this. document dot add event listener. So we're going to look on something for when somebody scrolls, and then we're going to, I guess, we'll show the message then. So we're going to prompt message. And we're going to do that anytime somebody scrolls. And instead of doing that on button click, let's go ahead and do that basically right away. We're just going to listen for that JavaScript event right at the beginning. And we don't really need this button anymore. Okay, so what's going to happen now is we're going to have it's called show prompt, and basically what it's going to do is anytime somebody scrolls, we're going to prompt that message, and that's going to get brought in by this component. So now if we go back into our index page, we need to put a little bit of text here to get a scroll bar, otherwise we're not going to be able to scroll. So let's go lorem ipsum. I like this website. Just get a bunch of dummy text, and we'll just duplicate that a bunch of times. Okay, so now that should be enough for a scroll bar. And let's go ahead and run this. And if you notice, I scroll just a little bit and a prompt comes up, which is what we want. Now, what happens if we navigate away from this page and then come back? So we navigate away and then we come back. Now if I scroll, I'm actually getting two prompts. Maybe it's hard probably to tell, but I am clicking cancel twice. And if I go away and come back again, well, I'm getting a bunch of prompts now. But what is happening? And what is happening is that this this uninitialized async is getting run each time, and we're not cleaning up after ourselves. So what we need to do is actually implement iDisposable here. And this is not anything new, but I did want to point it out because people are going to be using JavaScript a lot more potentially with these components now, and it's good to have good practice when you do that. So we're just going to implement iDisposable, and we need to we basically need to make a dispose method on our element here. And when this element gets disposed, we want to stop listening for this event. So let's go ahead and create another function called stop prompt. And we're going to remove event listener here. And this isn't going to quite work. We're going to make a little modification in just a second. But now we're going to do stop prompt. Okay. And we don't really need a message here because it's just stopping a prompt. And because dispose is void, I'm not sure if you can do async task. I don't think that's going to work because iDisposable, if we look at it, is a void. But maybe that would work. I guess let's try it. Yeah, does not implement dispose. So in this case, we got to just call it void, and I'm just going to put underscore equals, which means discard. We don't care about what happens here. So basically, we're going to try to unregister ourselves from that prompt. And so we're going to scroll, and when we scroll, we're going to get a prompt, and when we stop the prompt, we should stop getting that scroll. So let's go ahead and see if that is the case. First of all, I don't think it's going to work off the top of my head because of the way JavaScript works, but okay. We got this cancel. Oh, let's go away from it. Let's come back. And you can see we still got it twice. So what's going on here? Just the way JavaScript works, this is technically a different function. Each one of these are its own function reference. So basically it can't find anything with this function reference because it's new. So what we need to do is let's just create another function out here. Let's just call it function scroll. And let's go ahead and put this in there. Okay, now the problem is we have this message that isn't being used anywhere. So let's just create a let message up here, and well, we'll have to call this something different now. Let scroll message, and we'll set scroll message equal to message. Now this is not probably the best JavaScript, but that's not the point. The point is I'm just showing you that how to basically clean up after yourself. Ideally, maybe you put this in a class, or maybe you have some kind of function that runs right away so that you're not worrying about variable scope and all these types of things. But in general, this should work. Now this function reference is the same. So let's go ahead and run this again. And you can see I'm scrolling, I'm getting the one pop-up. Now I go away, now I come back, and now I'm just getting one pop-up again. So this dispose kind of framework where you clean up after yourself is definitely important, especially when you're writing class libraries, so that anybody that uses your NuGet package or uses your project basically doesn't have to worry about cleaning up those things. And again, that's not always the case. It's really only if you have a global listener, like on the whole document. You could just have a listener on that element, in which case, once that element gets removed from the DOM, it's not going to have that. It's not going to have that JavaScript function reference anymore, or event reference anymore. But in general, if you're doing something globally, make sure you dispose of it after you're done. Okay, last thing I wanted to cover is the file input, which is something I've been kind of looking forward to for a long time. So let's go ahead and just copy this and we'll work through it. In the past, you kind of had to write your own, or you had to use somebody else's libraries that they made, but now it's built in to the .NET 5 framework, which is great. So what is going on here? We have this input file, which is a new thing, and when it changes, we're going to call onInputFileChange, which is this function here. We're going to get file change event args, and from there we can get these files and we can read them into a byte array. So we can do open read stream, read async, and read it into that byte array buffer. From there we can do pretty much whatever we want with it. In this case, we're going to create a little image using base64 encoding and putting it onto our screen into the image source attribute. So let's just go ahead and run it and see what it does. Alright, go to the counter and I'll just pick a file. And if you noticed, I did that a little quick, so let me do it again. I'll pick a file and it puts it right on the screen there. So all of this code is executing behind the scenes. It's reading that file and putting it on there, which is great. But you may need more than that. You may need to transfer this file down to the server, in which case I'm not exactly sure the best way to do that. Maybe you don't want to do this way. This way maybe only be if you need it on the client-side app, because otherwise you're going to have to read the whole thing and then transfer it over the wire, and then your server is going to have to read the whole thing. So probably you're just going to want to use a plain old input type equal file for that and put it in a form. But you know, it is what it is, I guess. You could, I'm going to look into it and see if there's anything else you can do with this input file. Maybe it is efficient to just pass that whole buffer down to the server. I have a feeling it's not. But yeah, I guess feel free to play around with the input file. I really like it. It's pretty simple. But yeah, that's input file. So as I was saying too at the very beginning, there are other things that are new. So feel free to check them all out. On toggle is a real simple one, but could be a really powerful one if you're using the details HTML element, so that you know when the details has been expanded out. And also another one that I'm looking forward to is the component, where is it? WebAssembly pre-rendering. And that is using a new component tag helper to render a specific component on a CSHTML page. So that's going to make that a little bit easier too. I haven't had a chance to play around with that yet, but I am looking forward to that. So I think that's about all I want to cover today. Definitely feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or if anything else you want me to cover. All right, thanks for watching.